What does it mean to live well and be virtuous in a world of suffering, chaos, and deterioration? What does it mean to go on living in a consciousness that is inevitably bound to the struggle of it only becoming more confused and tormented as it becomes more capable and aware? Generally speaking, most religious and philosophical concepts are spurred out of these sorts of challenges and questions. They represent humanity's attempt to overcome or deal with the deficiencies and difficulties bestowed into each pair of unrequested human hands. One perhaps especially unique example of such an attempt is the philosophy and religion of Buddhism. Somewhere between 6th and 4th century BC, in what is now southern Nepal, a boy named Siddhartha Gautama was born. He was born to an aristocratic family, his father, Shododana, being the king of a growing state in the Indian subcontinent. When Siddhartha was born, a holy messenger prophesied that he would become one of two things, either a great king or a great religious leader. When receiving this prophecy, being the conservative king that his father was, he determined that he would ensure that Siddhartha would become the former. He would ensure this by completely sheltering Siddhartha, confining him within a massive palace he had configured away and walled off from the rest of the world, rigidly filtering what was allowed in by a standard of perfect health, beauty, and luxury, constantly cleansing the palace of any signs of imperfection, discomfort, misery, ugliness, illness, and death, preventing Siddhartha from ever knowing they existed. All of this, in Shododana's mind, was to create a world that would be easy for Siddhartha to fall in love with and desire kingship of, removing any need to consider, question, or become interested in religious and spiritual domains. Throughout his childhood and into early adulthood, however, Siddhartha would, for this very reason, become increasingly curious and begin probing into life. At 29 years old, his existential curiosity finally boiled over the walls of the palace and into the unknown and prohibited kingdom of beyond. At this point, Siddhartha would make the decision to take his first journey out of the palace and into the world. In anticipation of this, in an effort to maintain the masquerade of a perfect, redeemable world, his father ordered the streets to be removed of all signs of pain, suffering, sickness, old age, and death. Despite this, however, while on his journey, Siddhartha would still happen by an extremely sick man, his body obviously blemished and written on by the conditions of his ailment. When Siddhartha saw this, he asked the chariot driver whom he was being escorted by what was wrong with the man. The chariot driver informed Siddhartha that the man was sick and explained to him what this meant. After returning to the palace for a little while, on a second journey out, at some point, Siddhartha would next be exposed to an elderly man who looked extremely feeble, frail, and wrinkled. Again, when he saw this, having never seen an elderly person of such age, he asked the driver what was wrong. The driver informed him of the phenomenon of aging and how, like that man, all human bodies grow old with time, decaying, growing unattractive, and becoming weak. Again, after returning to the palace for a little while, on a third journey out, this time, Siddhartha would encounter a funeral procession occurring through the streets, exposing him to, for the first time, a dead body. Again, Siddhartha asked what was wrong and was informed by the driver about death and the impending finite limit of all living things. Now, completely and utterly devastated by his collection of newfound insights into the fragility of the physical body, the temporal horizon of age, and the finite, terminating nature of existence of which all living things, including himself, would inevitably face, he felt the final straw break, destroying his comfortable, sheltered, youthful image of the world and replacing it with its true, horrifying one. Realizing this truth of the world, now, Siddhartha could no longer return and stay in the palace. Rather, he found himself compelled by a new quest to overcome and deal with this image of life. On a fourth journey, Siddhartha, now seeking answers, noticed a meditating holy man in the city who seemed to be at complete peace amidst the horrors that surrounded him. Curious about the man's apparent ability to attain such a state, after inquiring into him, Siddhartha would become inspired and spend the following many months on a sort of spiritual quest, seeking holy practices, ideas, and answers. However, being a very pragmatic and inquisitive man by this point, refusing to mindlessly agree with the conventions, orthodoxies, and blind faiths required for many of the religious ideas and practices of the time, Siddhartha found himself at the very brink of available ideologies and methods, still completely unsatisfied. At some point, along with a group of several other men, Siddhartha would engage in the extreme radical spiritual practice known as asceticism, which involves a complete renunciation of earthly indulgences and pleasures in an attempt to deprive the body and free the self. After many months of starving himself into an unrecognizably weak, malnourished, skin-draped collection of bones, Siddhartha still had found nothing in the form of answers or resolutions to life. He could not think straight, and the extreme physical deprivation only created more futile suffering. And so, he began to eat food again, returning back somewhere into the middle of the two extremes. Now, ostracized by the ascetic men for what they felt was giving up, Siddhartha would continue on his own, meditating alone in the forest away from the rest of the entire world. He would continue to both eat and meditate, not depriving his body, nor pursuing much beyond what his body needed for basic comfort. Throughout this period, Siddhartha would experience a collection of introspective realizations, and it was here that Siddhartha would begin to formulate his fundamental philosophical tenets, and it was here that Siddhartha's story would become the story of the Buddha, or the Enlightened One. In this moment, Buddhism would begin its journey in human history, challenging and changing the course of religious, social, and philosophical orthodoxy forever. In truth, it isn't clear how much of the Buddha's story is real or fable, if not entirely fable. Most of what is known about the Buddha and his teachings are based on oral accounts that were written down centuries after his death, leaving plenty of room for various interpretations and supplementary details to be added and twisted. Furthermore, there are numerous versions of his story that are accepted as accurate, each with at least slightly different details, tones, spiritual references, and overarching implications. However, regardless of literal accuracy and variation, the general story of the Buddha arguably always remains the same at its core. It is a story of us all. The story of growing up, becoming curious and tempted, seeking to move out and beyond the borders of the sheltered reality maintained by our parents, society, and our underdeveloped psyche, beginning to discover life's contaminated horrors for the first time, and the extreme lengths we often go to in order to try to understand, overcome, and escape them. In terms of Buddha's specific philosophical ideas, his core principles are contained in what he termed the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth being that life is fundamentally suffering. No matter who or what, all living things are bound and connected by this intrinsic existential quality of suffering in its broadest sense. The second noble truth proposes that this suffering is a consequence of our desires and attachments. The third truth, in a revolutionary way of thinking for its time, goes on to argue that since suffering is a product of attachment and desire, one can personally overcome and end suffering by eliminating or recalibrating their desires and attachments. The fourth and final noble truth contains the steps Buddha believed were necessary to do so. This collection of steps would be named the Noble Eightfold Path, also often referred to as the Middle Way. These 8 steps include right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These concepts are not so much steps to be achieved or discovered in a linear order, but rather a wheel of actively circulating behaviors and wisdoms that one must constantly be turning. In broad summary, it essentially calls for the practice of wisdom, humanistic morality through universal compassion, moderation, self-knowledge, and reaching enlightenment or nirvana through non-attachment and the elimination of desire. Essential to the success of Buddhist teachings is this final idea of non-attachment and no desire. Admittedly, this concept can sound rather convoluted, or at the very least, counterintuitive at first, but it starts by recognizing the true nature of the self, which is, in at least one interpretation of the Buddha's teachings, non-self, or emptiness. Buddha argued that fundamentally, our external world is in perpetual, unattainable flux, and consequently, so too are we. We are but collections of constantly changing qualitative interactions between the world and our thoughts, and thus, the idea of a fixed, independent, identifiable self is a delusion. This is essential to understand because it suggests that the self that we are trying to satisfy, escape, or eternalize never even really exists in the first place. Rather, the capital I that we describe is merely a state of emptiness constantly being filled and emptied by the succession of each moment. This concept can perhaps be experienced distinctly when one considers how there is no real central point of sensation and experience when one experiences something like smell, mental vision, taste, memory, or emotion. Of course, they can be pointed to the mind, but where in the mind? After the nose, who or what is smelling? Or, let's say, if you imagined a purple cat right now and visualized it in your head, where is the purple cat? How is the purple cat? Where are you seeing it from? There is just a blank emptiness filled up by the interacting thoughts and sensations of the moment, all becoming one constantly changing hybrid of self and material world. Buddha's teachings are about reorienting our view of ourself so that we see this, that there is none, so we can then reorient our view of the world. According to the Buddha, we suffer not as a result of not having enough things like money, status, success, or ideal external circumstances, but because the desire for such things is attached to the impossible delusion of a permanent self capable of being satisfied by desire. And the only way out of this is ending, or at least attempting to reduce, one's dependence on such desires and attachments, living with some form of restrained moderation and conquering the prodding delusion of self. Though one may conquer 1,000 times 1,000 men in battle, yet he indeed is the noblest victor who conquers himself. Self-conquest is far better than the conquest of others. Not even a god, an angel, Mara, or Brahma can turn into defeat the victory of a person who is self-subdued and ever restrained in conduct, said the Buddha. Of course, Buddhism is not without its shortcomings and outdated artifacts. For secular types, its religious association can likely pose its fair share of problems. And outside of this, just in terms of its general core principle, can one truly desire no desire? Does this work as a final desire, ceasing the very thing required to enact it? Or does it create a mirage effect that holds us in further submission to it? Moreover, to what extent do we really have any control over our desires, the information we encounter, and how it all works together to affect us? And as the world and humanity continues to develop further and further, and temptations and indulgences and distractions seep into every corner of modern societal life, we are likely left with, at the very least, an extremely difficult uphill climb into even the secular form of his teachings. However, regardless of this and any other difficulties or pitfalls, Buddhism still remains a highly unique and compelling system of thinking. Over millennia, it has seen many different iterations, interpretations, updates, and effects, not only in the East, but also in the West, even influencing many significant Western philosophers by the likes of Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Emile Cioran, Alan Watts, likely David Hume, and many others. Currently, it is the world's fourth largest religion with over 500 million followers worldwide, primarily divided into two main overarching categories, Theravada and Mahayana. At its core, Buddhism still remains one of the most unique and dynamic schools of religious thought, grounding its ideas in empirical experience and practical methodologies, making its wisdom accessible without necessarily depending on any gods or faith in the unknowable and untouchable, bringing the spiritual down into the hands of the pragmatic everyday person. And perhaps most significantly, it confronts the suffering and darkness of life directly and does not keep us in the palace of ignorance. It does not try to lie to us. It does not shelter or coddle. It makes its best efforts to find the minimums and maximums of life and lead us down a path towards some semblance of hope and living well in spite of what's really out there.